I do not own the rights to this music.
In the Lord, I will trust in the Lord until I die. Oh yes, I will trust in the Lord. I'm gonna trust in the Lord. Oh, I'm gonna trust in the Lord until I die.
Hello, and welcome to Sunday School Summary with Brother Ron. Sunday School lesson for Sunday, February 5th, 2023. Our reference material for the Sunday School Summary is based upon the International Sunday School Lesson Series as published by the Sunday School Publishing Board. We are discussing Chosen, Not Choice as the title of the Winter Lesson Series, and it is a discussion of the distinctiveness of God's calling, which is based on grace rather than humankind's merit. We are in Unit 3, and we are talking about God's call and its responsibilities. And in the God's Calls and Responsibilities series, it teaches that God's call and the responsibilities of that call are without regard to an individual's past, present, or abilities. The title of our first lesson in the Unit 3 Winter Lesson series is titled Wisdom and Foolishness, or it's the reliance on the wisdom that comes from God versus the wisdom that comes from man. And the lesson, the key verse comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 28 through 29, and it reads, God chose the lowly things of the world and the despised things and the things that are not to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before him. So God can use all people and all abilities. So just because we may be perceived to have different or greater abilities does not mean that God can use us more than the next man. The title of today's lesson, Wisdom and Foolishness, comes from the book of 1 Corinthians. And in this book, the Apostle Paul conducted a ministry in Corinth, or modern-day Greece, and led many members to Christ, and a congregation was established there. The book of 1 Corinthians is a letter that the Apostle Paul wrote while in Ephesus to the believers in the church congregation at Corinth. And the letter was in response to a message from members of Corinth concerning the divisions in the church there. In his response, Paul addressed the divisions of the church. And Paul begins his response with encouragement to the congregation at Corinth by thanking the congregation for their obedience to God's word, for their offerings and support of the church, and lastly, that they appear to be patiently waiting for the revelation of God. However, Paul expressed serious concerns about the strife and divisions within the congregation concerning the interpretation of the gospel and salvation, which brings us to today's lesson. There are 3 summary points for today's lesson. By foolishness, and that's from 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 18 through 21. by faith, 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 22 through 25, and frailty from 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 26 through 31. The passages for the lesson today revolve around the key words of faith, foolishness, weak, and wise. Now, we know that faith is the complete trust, assurance, belief, or confidence in God. It is the faithfulness of God in today's lesson, and it is to trust God's wisdom in today's lesson. Foolishness is a lack of seriousness or sound judgment, and the message of the saving grace of the cross is seen as foolishness to the unsaved in today's lesson. Weak is a lack of strength or feebleness. It's also considered to be frail. And the message of the cross appeared to be weak to some in today's lesson, but we see that God can use the weak to show how strong he is. Wise is the characteristic or experience, knowledge, and good judgment. And God does not need to use the wisdom of humans to accomplish his purpose in today's lesson. The first summary point by foolishness, and that's from 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 18 through 21. And in these passages, the Apostle Paul talks about the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing in sin, but to those who are being saved, it represents the power of God. For he says, it is written that I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, the intelligence of the intelligence I will frustrate. So he asks, where is the wise person? Where is the teacher of the law? Where is the philosopher of this page? And he talks on, and he says that has God not made foolish the wisdom of the world? And he goes on to say, for since in the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not know him, and God was pleased through the foolishness of what was preached to save those who believe. So we are saying that to those who do not know the power of God, it may be foolish to place our faith in God. But for those who have been saved, we recognize the power of the salvation of God and the message of the gospel. By faith, 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 22 through 25. And in these passages, Paul reminds the Corinthians that to the Christian, wisdom is acquired based on faith in God. And he addressed the Jews who were demanding a sign, and Greek looked for wisdom. But he says that we preach Christ crucified. And he says that it is a stumbling block to the Jews and foolishness to the Gentiles. And he says that Christ, the power and the wisdom of God, is what he preached to all people. And he says, for the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than human strength. So we should not think too highly of ourselves as to our wisdom, because in our strongest wisdom, it does not meet the weakest wisdom of God. Frailty, by frailty, is the last summary point, and it's from 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 26 through 31. And in these passages, Paul challenges the Corinthians to consider or remember their calling and the condition they were in before that calling. And he says, brothers and sisters, think of what you were when you were called. He says, not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many were influential. Not many were of noble birth. He says, but God chose these people, the things of the world, to shame the wise. And he said, God chose the weak of the world to shame the strong. So he said, God chose the lowly of the world and the despised things and the things that are not to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before him. It is because of him that you in Jesus Christ has become for us wisdom from God. And that wisdom is righteousness, holiness, and redemption. So that is wisdom that we receive from God that the people of the world do not have. And he says, therefore, if anyone is to boast, then it should be to boast in the Lord. So for all our accomplishments, it is not from us, but it is from God. So we should thank God for our accomplishments, and we should thank God for our wisdom and direction in our life. This is Brother Ron with a Sunday School Summary for Sunday, February 5th, 2023. Thank you for watching. Have a blessed week, and we hope to see you next Sunday for another edition of Sunday School Summary with Brother Ron.